All right. Uh,
Put it on my schedule. So is there a website to go to? For example, the third Saturday, you said the test in Sun Tree. So July is gonna be 15 July. How far ahead of time is the
because that'll be a week after we finish.
correct? Timing work is good.
I did that on purpose.
Mhm.
Um, there may be a cars one that following Tuesday, but I don't know. It's iffy because he's doing too much. So he's trying to do it like every other month or something. Um,
You have to,
I can send you the link for Gary. I think you pronounce it Lindgren. W4GAL is his call sign, and he's the one that runs the Laurel. Um, Interesting guy. He does a lot of remote operating because he's now in an apartment where he can't have his equipment, so he doesn't. He operates other people's transmitters in Australia and Indonesia from his computer. There's a there's a free service you can do that. Um, and then I forgot the name of the one he belongs to where it's a subscription. You have to join it, and then you pay like 9 or 10 cents a minute to operate. But now that one has some really nice equipment. You know, they have stacked Yagi arrays on rotators on big towers and running 1,500 watts and all that kind of stuff. And you can use it for a minimal charge. He did a demo at the PCARS meeting one time doing it. Uh, Operated in Australia. Okay. All right. The most important thing is a radio transceiver. Now, I'd say equal to that is an antenna, but they didn't have that in their thing.
Presuming a long line.
unless you want to smoke the transistor.
Uh, if you get a base station or a mobile unit to use as a base station, and most of them don't have a built-in power supply, so you need a separate power supply, and they typically run off of 13.8 volts, the nominal 12-volt DC. If you want to do any of the digital modes, you will need a computer. It could be something simple as a Raspberry Pi, uh, possibly even your cell phone. Normally, people would use a laptop or a regular desktop computer to connect because that's what you need to generate the tones used for the digital modes and to decode them. And of course, you need microphones and speakers or headphones, depending on your bent. The cables hook everything up. Grounding is an important issue from safety standpoint, as well as getting rid of stray RF or RFI. And then, of course, you do need some kind of antenna. I've read where you should spend as much money on the antenna as you did on your radio. And that's not hard to do. If you looked at antennas in any of these places, they get up there in the pricey range.
Right, but it's that little dipole ones.
Yeah.
If you can make them by hand, use a coax. Right.
Yep.
Make them resonant.
Do an end-fed cheap.
That's even cheaper with a bellum, right?
Yep.
One.
In fact, I got a QRP one that's good for 20 watts that I built as a kit from QRP Guys, I think it was.
Yeah,
It's like $30 with the wire and everything and the ballon. You just have to wind the toroid.
which I can't do anymore.
I still can. Okay. Transceivers can draw a lot of current, so that's one of the factors that you got to take into account when you look for power supply. My 7300, if I run it at 100 watts, is going to be showing 18 to 20 amps. So-
We don't want to plug it on the same circuit as your refrigerator.
Yeah,
Well, no, but that's at 13.8 volts.
One of the good things now, as far as you want to do economy on power supplies, you buy the computer power supply, 12 volts, 50 amps or 30 amp ones. They run like $25-$30. If you buy one that they recommend is gonna run you 100,
Oh, yeah,
200.
at least 100.
Right, but the ones, I have the little ones that are just, you'll plug in tight, and you have to wire them up. They work very good.
Actually, if you get an old AT type surplus power supply from a desktop with a little converting, they've got enough 12 volt supply that you could run most radios off of it.
Yeah,
and there's a place called Bits Computer down in Norwood, and there's a whole bunch of those things stacked to the corners.
Okay, and because of the current you're drawing, because it's a low voltage, that's the reason, because at 100 watts, your radio is going to be drawing at least 200 watts. Most of them are less than 50% efficient. So you're going to have some voltage drop. So you need to use 10 gauge wire, 8 gauge, depending how long it is. So you kind of need to watch what that voltage drop is. You got to keep it normally in this 12.8, 14.8 range. Some of them, like I know my 7300 starts acting weird when you get down below 12 volts. So normally I don't know any that don't require 13.8 volts, except the $14,000 ICOM that has a built-in power supply and it's 200 watts. It plugs into,
110.
I don't know if it's 110 or, yeah, probably. Not quite up to 240 yet.
You haven't bought that one yet.
No, I looked at it. It's nice.
Uh-huh. That's Bruce's thing.
Yeah. I have to talk him into getting it. Maybe he'll give me his 9700.
Yeah,
There's, like I said, they're usually less than 50% efficient. So for a 50 watt transceiver, you're going to want at least 100 watt power supply. And they normally, the more expensive ones that are specialized for ham radio, like Ernie was talking about, they usually rate those in amps as opposed to watts.
5 amps.
Right.
Or even 50s.
And they may have meters on them, or they might just have a switch and a LED that says it's on. Obviously, it costs more if it's got meters.
We had Hamfest days and people would bring
Yeah,
equipment and do swaps and trades.
right.
In January, they have the
Right.
big ham fest over in Orlando.
Right.
Right.
Ham
And
hamcation
October, they have the ham fest down in Elkhorn,
at PCARS.
Hmm.
And that's a pretty big one.
In October.
October. I think it's around the 10th, usually the second weekend.
That sounds about right. I don't remember. I went to it last year. And if you go on Sunday, the club usually puts out a big table full of their junk they want to get rid of. And it's reduced price on Sunday.
When it makes-
Some of it is take it, we don't want it.
We'll give you $5, take this.
I didn't find anything that good, but I did pick up a few.
Kind of like a gun show.
Yeah,
First day is expensive.
yeah.
Did you say dumb show or dumb show?
Okay, so
So
in the example here, you're showing that 13.8 volts. What are we showing here? Oh,
To 100
to
watts.
do 100 watts, you're going to need at least 7.25 amps. So, and you really want to have more margin than that, because you're radios, probably not 50%. So why are short, heavy gauge wires used for a DC power connection?
Okay.
Realize moves.
Which of the following is an appropriate power supply rating for a typical 50-watt output mobile FM transceiver? And that's typical for a mobile, 50 watts.
Do you maybe overkill and go with B? For mobile?
All times 12 is 124.
Yeah, that's more than 100.
Yeah.
The others are not, right? Well, first of all,
Oh, that's right, because
24 volts doesn't count.
yeah, but it's less than 50% efficient, so.
Right. So you only have two choices.
Yeah, they,
Okay, if you want to do digital modes, which Ernie doesn't do, we have a bunch of I shouldn't say older club members, older hams, because I'm older than most all of them, don't like digital modes. It's not ham radio. There's like philosophical, religious arguments between the thing. So I'm new to the hobby, and I spent 32 years doing digital stuff, so it's sort of natural to me. I tend to do that as opposed to audio stuff, but that's just my thing. Plus, I like to build stuff more than actually operate it. Just, and that's one of the things. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff you can do. In order to use the computer to do a digital mode like WSJTX, which is one of the more popular ones, and FT8 is a subset. WSJTX is a software suite, and there's I don't know, 8 or 9 different modes. FT8, FT4, JT8, JT65, PSK something, MSK 144. Huh?
I think we went over that 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. The Meteor Scatter one is part of that. So you have to get audio, transmit and receive, and a way to do push to talk between the computer and the radio. In an older radio where you have separate mic in and speaker out, that's what you would use to connect to your computer. In some of those cases, because the radio doesn't have a sound, what they call a sound card in it, you have to put a device in the middle. Signal Link is one of the more popular ones, runs about $150, and they make adapter cables to fit most of the radios. And it makes that interface between your computer and an older radio. If you've got a radio that has, quote, sound card built in it, and most of those newer ones do, and they may have a USB connection, so you can go straight with a USB cable between your computer and the radio, and you have virtual audio channels on the USB.
That's how my brother's is set up. He's got the USB coming in.
Yeah. So when you go in the setup for WSJTX on the radio part, when you select that interface, you'll pick USB codec for the speaker and microphone connections. So they're virtual channels. And it also takes care of push to talk through the USB. All right. Here we go. So you want to connect your transceiver speaker out either virtually or physically to your computer line in or a microphone in. So you're going to do an output to an input. Likewise, you're going to do an input to an output from the computer speaker out, or it might be called line out, to the microphone in on the transceiver. Now, in some cases, like my 5100, they use an RJ45 connector for the microphone. So if I was to do digital with that, I'd have, like with the Signal Link, actually plug it into the microphone jack, and of course, then you don't have microphone. It's either or, digital or analog. I haven't done that because I don't want to spend $150.
Let's say with Radio Shack when you need them.
This is just kind of showing a typical setup of this phaser is one of the QRP transceiver boards. I think they sell that as a kit that you can build, and it would go with the audio in and out. I think that has some sound card built into it, so you just make a straight connection.
Isn't JT8 operate normally on one frequency? Man, don't they?
Yeah. Well, when you run FT8, well, I don't know about JT8. It's one of them I haven't tried. FT8, you operate around for 40 meters. You'd operate at 7.074, and it's basically 3 kilohertz wide. So you operate within that band normally. Some of them go a little bit higher, and during contest modes, they open up another little band. It's 50 hertz wide. So there's a lot of
Channels.
stuff going on. They're not channels per se, because I mean, there's not fixed frequencies, but they're 50 hertz wide. So you need to transmit in an open slot, basically. And you look at the waterfall display and at the spectrum and see where there isn't anybody. You don't see a yellow or orange waterfall coming down, and try to transmit there, or else directly at the frequency of the station you're receiving. And you can have it set up where it'll automatically do that when you click on that call sign. I mean, it'll change frequency to the frequency it decoded, and your transmit frequency will be the same. The other option is to do split mode, and you can have it maintain your transmit frequency at a specific point. Ideally, you'd want to set it about 1500 hertz, which would be the middle of the band. And that gives you the best signal to noise ratio, because out towards the end, it gets a little worse. Of course, everybody else is trying to do that too. So, but if you camp out at one spot, you got a pretty good chance of getting a good signal out. It's probably a bigger problem on transmit than it is receive, because it can decode minus 25, minus 26 dB. I mean, you won't even see a bump on the spectrum display, and it's able to decode that. Okay, what signals are used in a computer radio interface for digital mode operation?
Yep.
How are transceiver audio input-output connected in a station configured to operate using FT8? Yeah, the key there is the WSJTX off. Which stands for Weak Signal Joe Taylor. He's the guy that invented it, doing deep space communications research and moon bounce, meteor scatter, all that kind of stuff. Which of the following connections is made between a computer and a transceiver to use computer software when operating digital modes? Remember, in to out, out to in.
Yeah,
Charlie.
I'm in the terms of speak.
Okay. Okay. All of your cables, especially audio and microphone cables, somewhat power supply, you can get stray RF or RFI, which can come down your feed line from the antenna, particularly if you've got common mode where the antenna isn't balanced. So you can have a current coming down on the outside of the shield. The shield can look like two conductors, one inside and one outside. One of the, besides putting a choke on the feed line to stop it, you can use ferrite chokes on all those cables in the station, and they make them as clip-ons. You know, it's or snap-on,
Yeah,
so it's split in half, and
fingerprints.
yeah. And you should really put those on everything. And you know, a lot of the USB cable, the more expensive USB cables come with them already installed. The cheaper ones don't. Same for the audio cables, you know, like the 3.5 millimeter phone jack things. You don't find many of those with a ferrite on it, but they're easy enough to add, and they're fairly cheap. Like on Amazon, I can buy a box full of assorted sizes for 10 or 15 bucks. There's a picture of some, and you can run more than one turn through it. And, you know, every turn increases the inductance by that factor. So every time one goes through the middle, that counts as a turn. Which of the following could you use to cure distorted audio caused by RF current on the shield of a microphone cable?
Delta.
Gee.
That was a hard one. Okay, good grounding can help avoid interference. Ideally, you want to connect everything that's metal, at least, okay, to a single point ground. Now, that can be a big copper plate, is an entrance panel where your stuff comes through, usually with lightning arresters attached. In some cases, like some of the stations, the new one they outfitted at P-Cars in the trailer, and they've got long pieces of copper pipe behind the stations that everything connects to, and then that's connected to the outside ground. Inside, you can also use wide braid, like this. It doesn't work outside because it corrodes and it's not really suited for weather. The copper strap, which is more expensive, works very well, even though it gets all green. It still works, and for stuff like lightning, because of the surface area, okay, if you get wide, like 2-inch wide stuff, it doesn't matter as much how thick it is, because all that high voltage is going to be on the surface.
So you want the surface area then versus using like 8-gauge wire going to
Yeah, well, I mean,
Yeah.
you can use 6 or 8 gauge wire, but wide copper strap is better.
Which is the answer to that one.
there you go.
Which of the following is preferred?
D.
Yeah, definitely don't want to do A.
Yeah, and C.
That comes apart really easy.
Yeah, I wouldn't use twisted pair either.
Yeah, and steel's not too good. Okay, mobile radio in a car, okay, slightly different. And there you want to make sure that you have a good ground return. So you want to connect it to wherever your battery is connected to chassis ground. And even on the newer cars, they may make it hard to get to, but they'll usually have a place that you can connect. The positive terminal likewise should get back to the positive terminal on the battery, usually a direct connection. And you'll want to have fuses in both of those lines in a car. Whereas in your base station, you only fuse the hot side of the DC. Where should the negative power return of a mobile transceiver be connected in a vehicle? Okay, you can operate from batteries, particularly handhelds or a base station. And a lot of people, do you have batteries? A lot of club guys have batteries and solar cells with the charger. I guess for emergency operations.
I have a whole house, Jim.
Well, okay, there you go. Gas.
Yeah, natural gas.
So to determine how long you can operate on a battery, you need to divide the amp hour rating of the battery by your average current draw for your transceiver. And the example there is got a 10 amp hour battery, which is like a little motorcycle or cell that you see in a UPS supply. Actually, they're more like 8. And your transceiver is at 1 amp average. I've got a couple little QRPs that draw a little over 1 amp transmitting, so they would fit that. It'd be actually less than an amp average, I would say. So that should be good for about 10 hours.
It's pretty bit rough like a deep cycle marine battery.
And
Well,
what the
yeah.
batteries have on them is a rating. Amp hour ratings
What about it?
on batteries. Normally it's listed on
Yeah.
the train. You don't have to do any math, I can do that.
Nice meeting
Monday.
Okay, see you when, see you next, see you
Okay.
Friday, Bob.
Yeah. Oh, just in case, of course, you guys work, right?
He does.
you. I work.
Oh, okay. We have a breakfast meeting on Fridays. If you happen to be free and in the area at Umpas up the road here on State Road 3. So it's called SMA. They've been doing that since the 50s. It's ham spelled backwards. So it's not any particular club, although most of the people show up or belong to Indian River, but we got other people that are not club associated. And
It's my dentist, but it has the point of it.
okay, how can you determine the length of time that equipment can be powered from a battery?
Bravo.
Okay, microphone gain. You need to adjust it for proper audio modulation. So if you get it too high, you're going to get clipping and distortion. Make it very hard to understand you on the other end. Likewise, if it's way too low, they won't hear you at all. They'll get the carrier and hardly even be able to hear anything. So somewhere between those two.
We had that with the CDs too, which is kind of pinpoint.
Actually, you want to get close to 100% modulation, but that's you have to kind of do it by ear.
Some of those CVs have power mics on them.
For tuning on a transceiver, you can set the frequency. Well, I guess first thing, if you tune in above or below a frequency, you're going to get distorted audio, particularly on single sideband. Because in single sideband, there's no reference carrier there. So all you have is a little blurb of frequency that's the width of your baseband, your audio. And if you're off from where the carrier should be, it's going to make that sound shifted higher or lower. So you get a Donald Duck or whatever. So That's one of the problems with single sideband because there's no carrier. It's a little tricky to tune it in, and you get weird sounds until you kind of get really close.
So count.
In order to set the frequency, like on a handheld, okay, you usually have a keypad. Sometimes they let you program it that way. You might have a knob if it's in VFO mode where you can tune it and it goes in usually like 5 kilohertz steps. Or you can have it in a memory channel and just put it in memory mode and step through the memory channels. And you can set up the memory channels manually. You don't have to do the programming software. However, if you want to do a whole bunch of channels, it's a pain. Doing one is not a big deal. Most of them have scanning capability, so you can set it to scan through a range of frequencies or scan through memory channels. And you can tell it which memory channels range you want to go through. And it'll sit there either a one-time deal or continuously scanning so you can hear if there's anything going on. Now, some of the newer ones, like this, will give you a waterfall display, so you can actually see it on the waterfall too.
Continue the way.
That's why they cost more. That, Bluetooth, D-Star, all those things. Nothing's free. What's the effect of microphone gain on SSB transmissions? What's the result of tuning an FM receiver above or below a signal's frequency?
There's all the
Let's try,
we're changing over.
huh?
I was thinking of Donald Duck.
Well, that's it. That's SSB.
Yeah.
You just get distortion in FM. Which of the following can be used to enter a transceiver's operating frequency?
Awesome.
What is a way to enable quick access to a favorite frequency or channel on your transceiver? What does the scanning function of an FM transceiver do?
Charlie.
And receive, you know, typical activity.
They assume you're looking for activity. It doesn't know why it's doing it. It's just scanning through channels. Okay, you also have on a transceiver, you usually have a squelch. Some of the base stations, it's usually combined with like RF gain, which is kind of weird. Like on my 7300, the first half of the knob is RF gain, and then it becomes a squelch control.
It's kind of knob behind the knob kind of thing.
Well, yeah, it's two knobs, but it's
Yeah,
the same knob that does gain and squelch, which now this doesn't have a knob adjustable squelch. I've got a squelch button where I can turn the squelch off, which is the next part on here. But you have to actually go into the settings in order to change the value of the squelch. It's kind of an auto squelch by default.
Right.
Yeah, right. You know, you set the squelch so that only signals, I mean, what you up here is a real signal where there's a voice and will break the squelch. Otherwise, it mutes it.
That's what I did on CDs too. You turn your squelch knob up just until the static goes away.
Right. And every once in a while, you get a beep,
Yeah.
and you might have to tweak it a little more. Uh, when you're trying to tune in a weak signal, you may turn the squelch off so you can hear everything, because it's going to be down where the squelch is blocking it, muting it. So I've never actually done that, but it makes sense if you're trying to get something way down in the weeds. So what's the purpose of a squelch function?
Problem.
Mute the receiver when a signal is not present. How is squelch adjusted so that a weak FM signal can be heard?
Often. For sure.
I don't really say turn it off, but that's what it means.
Just above the noise level.
Well, that's why I guess they gave you a button here, because all I have to do is press that and it disables it.
That's government wording for off.
Okay. You have a frequency offset setting that's used with repeaters normally. So when you talk to a repeater, the advertised frequency the repeater's on, like the N1KSC, is 444.925. That's the frequency it's transmitting on, and that's what you receive. That's what you tune to. When you transmit to that repeater, it's on 70 centimeters, and the normal offset is 5 megahertz, either plus or minus. So in that case, you'd be transmitting on 449.925. So it's got a 5 megahertz plus offset. In the 2 meter range, it's normally 600 kilohertz offset, plus or minus. And when you program your radio, that's one of the things you put in for a repeater, whether it's what its offset is, plus or minus either 5 or 600.
So is there a magic book that you find all the information?
That's in the repeater book, which is online, or you can buy one for like $30 and then have to buy a new one every year. But you can get it online for free. You can't, I mean, you can read it. You can't add stuff without logging in, and I think you have to join it in order to do some of that. And it'll let you do a search of your local area or particular call sign, or a lot of different search capabilities. If you do, I did one yesterday, 25-mile radius from my house, and it brought up 31 repeaters.
Wow.
Of course, 25 miles away, you may not get on a handy talkie.
Right.
Depends on how high they are. Okay, what is meant by repeater offset?
Yeah.
Read them all,
That's what I was doing.
because sometimes the first one seems right and it's not. Okay, newer transceivers have digital voice capability. We call those some of the digital modes. So it'll be typically DMR, D-Star, or Fusion. These are all supposedly open source, but they're not really. You'll find DMR on the Chinese Baofangs and other versions of that. And that actually came from Motorola, I think, originally. D-Star is predominantly ICOM and Kenwood. I don't know anybody else that, maybe Flex, I'm not sure. But basically, it's those two that do D-Star. System Fusion is essentially Yaesu. So, the two big guys, ICOM and Yaesu, each have their own digital voice, of which they're not compatible with each other, of course. Uh, One of the reasons they're popular is because in those modes, you talk to a repeater that's connected to the internet, and it can connect to other repeaters, gateways, and reflectors all around the world. So you can go from a repeater here to a repeater somewhere halfway around the world and talk to somebody on a handy talk. Assuming you had a DMR or D-Star repeater here within range, which we don't. The closest one is about 43 miles away in Orlando. It's right on the edge of being able to get it, and definitely not from a handy talkie.
So you probably get it from a mobile.
Might get it from a mobile, depending on your
Right.
antenna.
The
If you got it on top of a bridge,
landfill's pretty hot.
yeah,
The highest point in Florida, right?
okay.
Outdoor.
You can also use what's called a hotspot. And those are normally a little Raspberry Pi board with a digital voice modem card attached. And it interfaces usually through wireless to the internet. So it looks like a simplex radio, because almost all of them run in simplex mode. So there's no frequency offset between transmit and receive. And you talk to it, and it gets you into the internet using D-Star or DMR or Fusion, which in some cases you can have it set up to handle all three modes. Now, it doesn't work all that well because if you're doing one, you can't hear the others. So, if you were going to do that, it'd be better to have three hotspots, one for each one on different frequencies. I don't have much else to say. They're relatively cheap if you make it yourself. You can buy the modem card and a case for about $30. And if you can find a Raspberry Pi board,
And you can still get the fours on Amazon.
yeah. Now there's some commercial ones and they go for a couple $100. But you get support with it, some advantages, but there's quite a bit more expensive. So what function is performed with a transceiver and a digital mode hotspot?
Alpha.
Okay, for DMR and D-Star, you have to have a call sign programmed into your radio for access. With DMR, you also have to get a DMR ID. So you have to go register, usually with Brandmeister, or I forgot what the other one is, and get an ID that has to also be programmed into your radio. You have to program the time slot. The basic difference between DMR and the others, it multiplexes two channels. So there's time slot 1 and time slot 2. So in theory, you can have two conversations or data and voice going on at the same time with DMR. So you have to select which time slot, and you have to select the color code, which is like the tone for a regular analog repeater. So it's a number. Most of them I've seen when they require it, it's number 1. And there's like 30, I think up to 32, I believe. So it's not really that useful, but it's there. For D-Star, You also have to register your call sign with the D-Star organization or whatever it's called. And I guess that gets checked. So not only do you have to have your call sign in there, but before you can actually make that connection, it goes over the internet and verifies that you are a D-Star authorized user. In DMR, they have groups set up in the internet called talk groups, and they go by a identification code, which is just a number, and they're set up for different geographical areas usually, or specific groups. Like you might have there's a Pi-Star group, which is the software for doing hotspots with Raspberry Pis. I think there's a DMR type user group thing. There's, some like user groups, general stuff like worldwide. There's US wide. There's Florida. Various states have talk groups. I mean, there's hundreds of them. So when you put in, you make that connection and you're going to a specific talk group, only the people that belong to that talk group actually hear you and can communicate with you. So it's not public. It makes it private to that group. There's a similar thing with D-Star, and they call them reflectors. I don't know what Yaesu calls theirs. I've never done fusion, and we don't have a fusion repeater within range for me. And here's the code plug again, which is what they call the software that you program your radio with to put all that information in. So whether it's a digital or analog, you still have to program it with that necessary information. So what is a talk group on a DMR repeater?
Bravo.
E.
Little private channels. What's the DMR code plug contain?
Software version D. What?
Say again?
The DMR software.
No,
No,
no.
it's a version.
B.
Mm.
Access information. It'll have the frequency and the color code and the talk group and all that stuff. How is a specific group of stations selected on a digital voice transceiver?
C.
Putting in the talk group code.
Now on DMR or D-Star, is there a directory listing on the screen that you can select, or you have to know that stuff?
Depends.
Depends.
On the
We don't have to get into it now. I was just curious.
I remember. It's not, we don't have it in digital mode. For D-Star, depending on the radio, you see, actually I can show you on this one. You get a separate or special display for digital mode. And you get to pick out to and from.
Okay.
So you go to one, the two, and click on that, and it'll bring up a menu. And one of the things is near repeaters or general CQ, which they don't actually do a CQ, but it's the same kind of thing. It's like an all call. So there's several options there. And then on the from, would be the repeater you're going through versus the reflector or whatever on the other end, or just a general call.
But it's got a call sign on there.
Yeah. As I recall, and I haven't used DMR in a while, but it's similar, except you normally have your radio programmed for all the different talk groups and repeaters. So you just kind of pick whatever channel you already had set up for that. Where this lets you do kind of the lookup, and it'll find local repeaters and things. Oh, and if I press the squelch button, oh, well, in digital mode,
Yeah.
see, you don't have a problem. If I did that in analog mode, it would be very noisy. Okay. What's the purpose of the color code used on DMR repeater systems?
Alpha.
Same as the tone, access code. Which of the following must be programmed into a D-Star digital transceiver before transmitting?
Alpha. Call sign.
Okay, so if you've got an HF transceiver or base station, there's a lot more controls to deal with than you find on a handy talkie. There, you got a squelch, you got a volume control, you got some way to tune it. In an HF receiver, normally you're going to have multiple bandwidths that you can select depending on whether you're doing CW or SSB or FM or AM. You use something like a 500 hertz or smaller filter if you're doing CW, usually 2500 hertz for SSB. You'd be 25 for FM, 12.5 for narrow FM, 6 for regular AM. And you need to match those with whatever mode you're doing to get the best signal to noise. Now you could listen to CW at 25 kilohertz, but it would be so noisy you might not even hear the tones. What's the advantage of having multiple receive bandwidth choices?
Alpha.
Everybody home with alpha? Oh. Noise reduction. You're looking to decrease your signal to or increase your signal to noise ratio. The wider the bandwidth, the more noise that you can bring in versus your signal. So ideally, you want to have your bandwidth of the receiver just as wide as the signal you're trying to receive. Because otherwise, anything beyond that is just adding noise. Which of the following receiver bandwidths provide the best signal to noise ratio for SSB?
We talk about it.
Yeah, we talked about it.
24.
Yeah. Now, it will be dependent on your radio, is what the bandwidth of the filter you have. And in some cases, you can change it. Like on my 7300, they have what they call passband tuning, and there's actually two. And you can separate them and make it a much narrower. But not all, a lot of radios, it'll just be fixed and you get whatever is available. There's also a control, most of them have, called a RIT, or receiver incremental tuning. They say sometimes it's called a clarifier. I've never heard of that except on the exam. Even there, I don't think they bring up clarifier. It allows you to independently tune your receive frequency from the transmitter. So it's kind of like a split operation, but without having to readjust your transmit frequency. If you're off frequency a little bit, you can adjust the receiver to frequency to tune it in better. Particularly SSB, and get rid of the Donald Duck or the barrel.
Mhm.
Which of the following controls could be used if the voice pitch of a single sideband signal returning to your CQ call seems too high or low?
Delta.
Push to talk. It's very important. Now, they don't talk about Vox, which is the other method. Right. Basically, you have a push to talk where you push a button, like on Handy Talkie, or on your transceiver, you got a microphone, you press the button. Or you can have it set up for Vox, where it automatically will turn the transmitter on when it receives when you talk loud enough to break. It's kind of like an anti-squelch sort of thing.
There's an important thing on that to remember too, it's an RTL. Release to listen.
Yeah. Right. Most of them turn the receiver off when you transmit it.
Mhm.
So what is the function of the transceiver's push-to-talk input?
Bravo.
Mhm.
And in most cases, you supply a ground to the transceiver in order to do the switch. So without anything connected, it's in receive mode by default. All right.
Great.
1 o'clock, not too bad.
So
We spent a lot of time BSing.
I think once I get started on this, I'll probably go for a mobile unit first, since I have so much time to kill driving back and forth between Savannah and Melbourne.
Well, there you
Yeah.
go. Yeah, you'd be able to get on SARNet all the way. Let's see.
Oh, stop recording, start recording. Breaks up.
Is mobile restricted to a certain wattage, like talkies are about
No.
watts?
But most mobile transceivers are 50 watts, whereas handy talkies are typically 5.
Limited by the
Yeah.
battery.
But I mean, you could put a 7300, it's not that big, in your car, make it a mobile. I mean, it takes same kind of input, except you're going to be drawing 20 amps off of your battery.
I don't want an
You
extra.
well, you probably want a bigger alternator.
Yeah, VCL's range up a bit.
Um,
I think you gotta stop sharing and stop recording.
oh,
With the red button.
oh. Well, I thought there was a separate stop recording.
There it is, right next to the share screen now, where it says pause, stop recording. To the right of the green.